Aileen Carol Pittman, a name that would later send shivers down spines, was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Her life from its earliest days was marked by tragedy and adversity. Her teenage parents, unable to provide a stable home, entrusted her to the care of her grandparents. However, this supposed haven soon turned into a house of horrors. Her grandfather, a figure of authority and protection, became her abuser. The innocence of childhood was brutally shattered, replaced by a deep-rooted fear and distrust. The seeds of darkness were sown early in her life. As Aileen grew older, her life continued to unravel. Her mother, unable to cope with the challenges of parenthood, abandoned her children. Left to fend for themselves, Aileen and her brother Keith were forced to navigate a world of neglect and abuse. The scars of her traumatic childhood were profound. Aileen's teenage years were a tumultuous period marked by violence, desperation, and a desperate search for love and belonging. She turned to sex work, a desperate attempt to survive, a stark reflection of the harsh reality she faced. Her early adulthood was a chaotic whirlwind of petty crime, substance abuse, and failed relationships. She drifted from place to place, seeking solace and escape from the demons that haunted her. Her troubled past cast a long shadow over her future, shaping her into a woman consumed by darkness. In 1976, Aileen married Louis Gratz Fell, a wealthy businessman. It seemed like a chance at a new beginning, a chance to escape her troubled past. However, the marriage was short-lived, ending in annulment just 9 weeks later. The brief respite from her tumultuous life proved to be fleeting. Aileen returned to her nomadic lifestyle, wandering from one town to the next. She was a woman on the edge, teetering on the brink of despair. Her past experiences had hardened her, making her cynical and distrustful of others. She carried the weight of her trauma, a burden that would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As the 1980s dawned, Aileen continued to struggle with her demons. She was arrested multiple times for various offenses, including armed robbery, car theft, and disorderly conduct. Her life was a chaotic mess, a constant struggle for survival. In 1986, Aileen met Tyria Moore, a young woman who offered her a glimmer of hope. They fell in love and formed a bond that would change the course of Aileen's life. However, the darkness within Aileen was growing, a monstrous force that would soon consume her. As the late 1980s dawned, Aileen Wuornos found herself adrift, a solitary figure wandering the desolate highways of Florida. Her troubled past had shaped her into a hardened, cynical woman, capable of both love and violence. She had met Tyria Moore, a woman who offered a glimmer of hope, a chance at love and stability. However, the darkness within Aileen was growing, a monstrous force that would soon consume her. Between 1989 and 1990, a series of brutal murders shocked the nation. Victims, mostly middle-aged men, were found dead, shot execution style. The common thread? They had all picked up Aileen as a hitchhiker. The serene Florida highways, once a symbol of freedom and opportunity, now concealed a sinister secret. The first victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner. On November 30th, 1989, Mallory picked up Aileen, offering her a ride. What transpired next remains a subject of debate and controversy. Aileen claimed that Mallory had attacked her, forcing her to defend herself. She shot him in self-defense, she insisted. However, the evidence painted a different picture. The bodies of 5 other men were discovered over the next year, each one a chilling reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of Aileen. David Andrew Spears, a construction worker, Charles Edmund Carskadden, a rodeo rider, Troy Eugene Burris, a salesman, Charles Richard Humphreys, a retired Air Force major, and Walter Geno Antonio, a trucker and security guard, all met a violent end at the hands of Aileen. Aileen's modus operandi was chillingly simple. She would lure unsuspecting men into her car, offering them sexual favors in exchange for money. Once they were alone, she would draw her weapon and execute them, often stealing their belongings. Her victims were typically middle-aged men, vulnerable and unsuspecting. The question of Aileen's motives remains a subject of much debate. Was she a cold-blooded killer driven by a desire for power and control? Or was she a victim of circumstance, a woman forced to defend herself against violent and predatory men? Her claims of self-defense added a layer of complexity to the case, raising questions about the nature of consent, victimhood, and the blurred lines between predator and prey. The media frenzy surrounding Aileen's crimes intensified as the number of victims grew. She became a symbol of fear and fascination, a figure who embodied the dark side of human nature. The public was captivated by her story, eager to understand the motivations behind her horrific acts. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement agencies across Florida were on high alert. The serial killer was on the loose, terrorizing the state's highways. The pressure was on to apprehend the culprit before more lives were lost. Aileen's luck ran out on January 9, 1991. She was arrested at a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her fingerprints were found on the car of one of her victims, and witnesses placed her at the crime scenes. The arrest of Aileen Wuornos marked the end of a terrifying chapter in Florida's history. The woman who had once been a victim of abuse and neglect had become a predator, a killer who had taken the lives of innocent men. Her story is a chilling reminder of the dark side of human nature and the devastating consequences of violence. The arrest of Aileen Wuornos marked the beginning of a high-profile legal battle that would captivate the nation. The trial, a media circus, unfolded in a courtroom filled with tension and intrigue. The prosecution painted Aileen as a cold-blooded killer, a predator who preyed on innocent men. The defense, on the other hand, argued that she was a victim of abuse, a woman forced to defend herself against violent attacks. The courtroom was a battleground, with each side presenting their case with passion and conviction. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and Aileen's own chilling confessions. They argued that Aileen had lured her victims, often posing as a sex worker before executing them in cold blood. Aileen's defense team, led by a team of experienced attorneys, sought to humanize their client. They delved into her troubled past, highlighting her history of abuse and neglect. They argued that her actions were a desperate attempt to survive, a desperate act of self-preservation in the face of violence and exploitation. One of the key issues at the heart of the trial was the question of Aileen's mental state. Defense experts argued that she suffered from mental illness, including borderline personality disorder and dissociative disorder. They suggested that her troubled past had left her emotionally scarred, making her vulnerable to impulsive and destructive behavior. However, the prosecution countered that Aileen was fully aware of her actions and the consequences of her crimes. They argued that she was a calculating and manipulative individual who had carefully planned her murders. As the trial progressed, the public was captivated by the dramatic courtroom proceedings. The media frenzy surrounding the case intensified, with every twist and turn reported in lurid detail. Aileen, once a marginalized figure, had become a household name, a symbol of both fear and fascination. The jury deliberated for several days before reaching a verdict. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was found guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Richard Mallory. The verdict was a devastating blow to the defense, who had fought hard to prove their client's innocence. The sentencing phase of the trial was equally dramatic. The prosecution argued that Aileen was a dangerous individual who posed a threat to society. They called for the death penalty, arguing that she should pay the ultimate price for her crimes. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded for mercy, citing her troubled past and mental illness. Ultimately, the jury sentenced Aileen to death. The sentence was met with mixed reactions from the public. Some people celebrated the verdict, believing that justice had been served. Others expressed sympathy for Aileen, arguing that she was a victim of circumstance. In the aftermath of the trial, Aileen continued to maintain her innocence, insisting that she had acted in self-defense. She wrote letters to friends and family expressing her remorse and regret. She also wrote to various authorities seeking clemency and a new trial. Aileen's case raised important questions about the nature of victimhood and the complexities of human behavior. Was she a cold-blooded killer or a victim of circumstance? The answer perhaps lies somewhere in between. Her troubled past undoubtedly shaped her into a troubled individual, but it does not excuse her crimes. Aileen Wuornos' story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and abuse. It is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there is hope for redemption. Aileen Wuornos, the woman once known as the highway serial killer, spent the final decade of her life on death row. Her days were a monotonous cycle of confinement, punctuated by the occasional visit from a lawyer or a spiritual advisor. The weight of her crimes and the impending execution cast a long shadow over her existence. Despite her grim circumstances, Aileen continued to maintain her innocence. She insisted that she had acted in self-defense, that her victims had attacked her first. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury had found her guilty, and the courts had upheld the verdict. As the years passed, Aileen's health began to deteriorate. She suffered from a variety of ailments, including hepatitis C and heart disease. The stress of incarceration and the constant threat of execution took a toll on her physical and mental well-being. In 2001, Aileen made a surprising decision. She renounced all remaining appeals, effectively signing her own death warrant. In a letter to the Florida Supreme Court, she declared, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again, too." This abrupt change of heart puzzled many. Some speculated that she was simply tired of fighting, weary of the constant legal battles. Others suggested that she was experiencing a mental breakdown, unable to cope with the harsh realities of her situation. Aileen's final months on death row were marked by a strange mixture of defiance and resignation. She continued to maintain her innocence, even as her execution date drew near. She also expressed a newfound interest in spirituality, spending hours reading religious texts and meditating. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. Her final words were a chilling echo of her defiant spirit. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." Aileen Wuornos' execution marked the end of a tragic chapter in American history. Her life was a tale of abuse, neglect, and violence, a story that continues to fascinate and disturb. The question of her guilt or innocence remains a subject of debate, a mystery that may never be fully solved. In the years since her death, Aileen Wuornos has become a cultural icon, inspiring books, movies, and documentaries. Her story has been analyzed and interpreted from a variety of perspectives, each offering a different insight into her complex character. Some see Aileen as a victim of circumstance, a woman who was driven to violence by a lifetime of abuse and neglect. Others view her as a cold-blooded killer, a monster who preyed on innocent men. The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between. Aileen's legacy is a complicated one. She was a troubled soul, a woman who struggled to find her place in the world. Her life was marked by pain and suffering, a constant battle against adversity. In the end, she was consumed by darkness, a victim of her own demons. The story of Aileen Wuornos is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and abuse. It is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there is hope for redemption. Aileen Wuornos' death did not mark the end of her story. Her legacy lives on, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart.